Welcome, everyone, to our Packers News pregame live chat alongside Pete Dougherty. I am Olivia Reiner. We are just 90 minutes away from the Packers game against the Minnesota Vikings. We'll bring you the latest on the inactives list, plus we'll take a look ahead to some matchups that you should keep an eye on. Before we get into that, as always, you can be a part of our conversation. If you're over on Facebook, Periscope, or YouTube, leave us a question down in the chat. Pete and I will get to some of those toward the end of our conversation today. I am no meteorologist. However, I know that 40-mile-per-hour wind gusts do not make for good football conditions. Luckily for the Packers, they will have kicker Mason Crosby, who has been dealing with left calf and back injuries all throughout the week. Undoubtedly, kicking is going to be a challenge inside of Lambeau Field due to the windy conditions. However, Crosby will now not break his streak of being active for every single game of his 14-year career. Between the windy conditions and his injuries, how limited is Crosby going to be in the game today?
I mean, we haven't had a chance to see him kick, so we don't know, but you got to assume at least somewhat. And these are going to be extraordinary kicking conditions. I'm guessing this is going to be the windiest game that I've been at since in '94. They played the Bears at Soldier Field on Halloween, and it was a monsoon. I mean, you wouldn't have believed it. And the rain was coming down sideways. And if you were going into the wind, a 10 to 15-yard punt was a great punt. I suspect this is going to be a little like that without the rain.
Can't wait to do that walk through the parking lot today, Pete, as we get to Lambeau after our live stream today. Crosby was just one of 7 players that were questionable for today's game. He is active. Left tackle David Bakhtiari is inactive after he's been dealing with a chest injury for the last couple of weeks. Last weekend against the Texans, the Packers rolled out right tackle Billy Turner. They shifted him over to left tackle, and they used Rick Wagner in at right tackle. As a whole, the offensive line didn't give up a single sack, and quarterback Aaron Rodgers was only pressured twice. How conservative are the Packers trying to be with their somewhat injured players, seeing as they're playing 2 games in 5 days?
Yeah, and they've even, LaFleur seems to be erring on the side of caution anyway, because he seems to be thinking of, like when we talked about Adams, he didn't want his, if he has to miss an extra game, he didn't want to play him and have it turn into missing 4 more games. They're thinking a little longer term. They're thinking about the end of the season with keeping guys out. So this is sort of in line with that. But yeah, for sure, with another game Thursday, maybe they just thought there's no way Bakhtiari, because I mean, he did participate in the padded practice, right? But they must have thought there's no way that he could both play today and then recover fast enough to play Thursday. Maybe that was a big issue. So why not just give him the 1 more game's rest? They've got a great record. Things are going well. It's probably pretty sound thinking to err on the side of caution at this point. And they did fine last week. And Minnesota, think of Minnesota. They traded Ngakoue. Is that am I close there?
You got it.
And Hunter's out for the year. So that's 2 really good rushers that the Vikings don't have. So, they're not the team that you would have thought going, into the season as far as outside rushers go. So this might be a game where you could get away with not having Bakhtiari and not have it hurt you so much. And Turner did fine last week. I mean, he held up fine.
Let's take a look at some of the matchups you should keep an eye on in today's Packers-Vikings game. Today is the 6th time that Packers cornerback Jair Alexander is facing off against Vikings wide receiver Adam Thielen. Over the last 4 games, Alexander has stuck mostly with Thielen. In week 1, Thielen had a really nice day. He had 6 catches for 110 yards and 2 touchdowns. However, Alexander wasn't in coverage for one of the touchdowns, and he intercepted a pass intended for Thielen. Who is going to come out on top of today's matchup?
Yeah, Alexander's playing great. I guess you still have to think they'll do it that way, but I don't know if you've had a chance, but with the way the Packers schedule's been, I've seen the Vikings a pretty good portion of probably 3 or 4 games this year. And that Jefferson, that first round pick, that guy is talented. And he is coming on. And so I wonder if maybe this time they just match up with those guys, because he's just as I think he could be just as dangerous as Thielen, maybe more so by this point or later in the year. I mean, the guy looks really good. So I wonder if they're going to do it differently this time, unless unless they think that for some reason Alexander will have Thielen's number. But I think both those receivers are really good, so I could just see having King and Alexander just stand on their side for the most part and covering whoever lines up there.
No Kevin King, so it's going to be Josh Jackson.
Yes, I'm sorry about that, Josh Jackson. Probably, and with him playing, that's right. With him playing, that means probably a lot more zone. I would think he's much more a zone corner than a man guy.
The other matchup Packers fans should keep an eye on is Packers wide receiver Davante Adams versus literally every single Minnesota Vikings defensive back. Last week against the Texans, Davante Adams was commenting on how surprised he was that he faced so much single coverage against the Texans. He had about 13 catches for 196 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Vikings game plan this week is going to be do not allow Davante Adams to face nearly as much single coverage and to be nearly as productive. How are the Vikings going to stop Adams this week?
Yeah, I mean, especially with Aaron Jones out, why in the world would you just not double Adams basically on every play? I mean, I would, especially because the 2 games where he's really gone off were the Vikings and then last week. So, I mean, that lesson just has to be hammered home with Minnesota. So you got to assume their game plan starts with how they're going to play Adams, and then if somebody else beats them, well, that's the way it goes. So I'm sure we'll see a safety over the top most of the time. I would think against Adams most of the time. Any kind of passing down for sure, but they do like to bring Harrison Smith up into the box to blitz and play the run. But even if there's a single safety, you got to think he's going to be tilting towards Adams' side.
Let's take a look over on Facebook, Periscope, and YouTube for some of your questions. Thank you all so much for joining us. We love to see you. Let's start out with friend of the show. Eric Baranchik has a question for you, Pete. Eric wants to know, how do you feel about inside linebacker Kamal Martin, who recently came off of injured reserve after dealing with a knee injury all season long toward the beginning of the season, an injury that he sustained during training camp? Martin saw increased snaps last week against the Texans after inside linebacker Chris Barnes left the game early. He's dealing with a biceps and a shoulder injury. However, he is active and good to go for today's game. What do you think about Kamal Martin and the job he has done so far, even just through one game?
Yes, Eric is being funny here because he and I, we do the video breakdown of the Packers game the day after. And we had 2 long discussions about Kamal Martin this week, one on Monday and another one on Friday. And, I think we see things similarly with him. We just see a pretty talented guy. I mean, I've seen the most talented inside linebacker they've had going back to probably Nick Barnett. I think that's probably fair. Maybe even Brian Williams, not Pro Bowl guys, but just a clear upgrade talent-wise, I think. He's going to make rookie mistakes and, maybe jumping the gun here. But, you saw it in camp, right? I mean, we saw the plays he made in camp. I don't think he played that much differently in the game than he did in practices. An interesting play. Raven Green's not playing today. But I wonder if we're going to see more true nickel defense with 2 real inside linebackers instead of using, obviously they don't have Green to use there. But now that they have Martin to go with, plus Chris Barnes, who's played okay. Maybe Pettine will feel more comfortable to have both those guys out there on most snaps instead of going with in essence is a dime defense with Raven Green, a 197-pound guy playing linebacker.
Especially if the windy conditions impact today's game and how the offenses are able to play, they might be wanting to run the ball a little bit more. Don't want to throw the ball in such 40-mile-per-hour wind gusts. perhaps we will see some more base defense.
I would. That's why I picked. I noticed I looked at all of our picks. I went with a really low score because the forecast was calling for this. So I'm thinking it's going to be tough to put up points. Could be proven wrong, but I know I went with a low score, and it seemed like everybody else has had the Packers into the 30s. It'll be tough to get that many. I would think to get that many points if this win is as strong as it was. At least earlier, I walked the dogs this morning, and it was really, really strong wind.
I almost got blown over this morning trying to go get my COVID test at Lambeau Field at 8:30 this morning. Hopefully the winds die down at some point for everybody's sake. Thank you, Eric, for your question. Let's move over to Brian here over on Facebook. Brian asks, cornerback Josh Jackson, starter in 2021 or lifetime special teamer? Cornerback Kevin King becomes a free agent in 2021. He has missed the last 3 games, including today, as he's been dealing with a quad injury, and it's given Josh Jackson an opportunity to step up and start. How are these injuries impacting Kevin King's future with the Packers and Josh Jackson's eligibility to potentially take over as starter?
Yeah, important stuff. And I think, a lot of that question will be determined for the rest of the season, especially, depending on how many games King misses. Jackson is basically auditioning, and he's played better. He had a decent game last week, and he's been better this year than he was last year. He's tackling in the run game, which, tackling was one of the big knocks on him coming out of college. So that's been surprising to see. Like, he's really sticking his nose in there in the wide run game. I don't know the answer to the question. I mean, if I had to just, make a guess, I'd still think he's a backup kind of guy, or more likely he should be in a system. He's a zone corner. He should be in a system where they play more zone than the Packers do. That would, he'd be be better off in a cover 2 defense. But he's got time here, and he's got a chance to change minds and to swing things his way. If King misses a couple more games, that'll be a lot of playing time for Jackson. And he has played a little better the last, he played okay last week.
Thanks, Brian, for your question. Let's take a question here from Levi. Levi asks, with running back Aaron Jones out and running back Tyler Ervin back in the lineup, do you think he'll get more touches? Ervin has missed the last several games as he's been dealing with a wrist injury, and as Levi mentioned, he is active for today's game against the Vikings. How is Ervin's return going to impact Matt LaFleur's run plan for today's game?
Well, he'll get a lot more, he'll get a lot of snaps, you would think. It's funny because that jet motion is such a big part of their offense. But when you look at the stats and the numbers when games are over, they really don't hand it off very often. It's, 3 or 4 times a game tops, They do like to throw him those quick bubble screens too. So I'm sure all that stuff will be mixed in. But it's more just the threat of that action and even of the bubble screen action than it is how that they do it all that much, because they don't do it that much. But I would think we'll see Ervin out there quite a bit, especially with Jones not playing. I would think we'll see Ervin in that kind of, I don't know, I call it a wingback position. That's what it looks most like to me.
Similarly, on the same vein, we have a question here from Reese. Reese wants to know, will running back A.J. Dillon see more snaps today? Aaron Jones did not play last week, so Jamal Williams and A.J. Dillon were the main backs for the Packers. Williams had about 19 carries, and Dillon had only 5. How much does that change in today's game?
Yeah, I don't know. Whether they keep threatening how much he's going to play, right? And then you think, well, last week with Aaron Jones, he's he's going to get 10 carries, I bet. No chance. So they're moving really slowly with him. You would think it'll increase a little bit at least. The one thing is, he never got anything going last week. I would think if he gets in there and they put him in for a series or for the first 4 or 5 plays of a series, and he gets 2 runs and he knocks off a 5-yard run and an 11-yard run, then maybe they'll start feeding him more. But he got off to a poor start. He slipped on one play last week, and he had a play or two where there really wasn't much there. And so I think they just kept going with Williams. But if if he gets off a couple of good runs, I think he would play more. And on the flip side of that, if he drops a pass, if he misses a blitz pickup, then he'll probably be spending even a little more time standing next to Ben Sermons on the sidelines.
Thank you, Reese, for your question. We've got a comment here from Thomas. He's got a lot of confidence in the Packers today. The Packers won't need a punter today or kicker Mason Crosby to kick field goals, perhaps because the Packers offense won't have to punt the ball away. They'll score on every single drive. They do need Crosby to go kick extra points after touchdowns. However, perhaps they'll just go for 2 and run the ball on every single attempt. All right, Thomas, thanks for your thought there. Let's take a question here from Michael. Michael wants to know when wide receiver Allen Lazard can come back. He is currently on injured reserve. However, he returned to practice this past week, so he's been practicing for about 3 days now. Same deal with inside linebacker Christian Kirksey, still on injured reserve. However, he is also practicing as well. When are the Packers going to activate either of those two to the 53-man roster?
I don't know. You think I think either or both will play Thursday in San Francisco?
It's possible, but they've only got a few more days to make that decision.
They had a chance to practice in pads, right? So they had that last week. The Packers won't be in pads at all this week with the Thursday night game. I wouldn't be surprised to see at least one of them in that game. Maybe they want to get them another padded practice, so that would mean waiting another week. But I wouldn't be surprised to see either or both play against the 49ers.
Thank you, Michael, there for your question. We appreciate it. Eric also points out, we'll go back to you, the Minnesota secondary was without 2 of its starters. Cornerbacks Mike Hughes and Holton Hill are both out today with injuries. This is not good for Minnesota, even with the win. Also worth noting that cornerback Cameron Dantzler is active for today's game, I believe, unless he was a last-minute inactive. I haven't seen the inactives list for today's game for the Vikings. However, he was placed on the COVID-19 reserve list on Wednesday. He is now off of that list. He was taken off of that list yesterday, so he's available to play today. Without an entire week of practice for him, how's the secondary going to fare?
I would have think that they're really concerned. I mean, that was the weakest part of their defense as it was with all the youth they have back there. And now to have those 2 guys out, 2 of their top 3 guys out, that's bad news for Minnesota. I think they do catch a big break with the wind. I don't think you're going to have to cover as much field, or at least not. I mean, it's going to be 2 different games when you're going against the wind or with the wind, depending. We haven't been in the stadium yet. But it'll be 2 different games if it's going basically north-south, south-north. And actually, Rodgers was saying last week that it's worse. It affects him more when the wind is a crosswind because it moves the ball so much. Whereas with or against, at least the ball goes straight, and against, you just won't throw much. But with, you could bomb away and throw bullets out there. Either way, it's a bad matchup for the Vikings to have those injuries at their weakest spot. But the strong wind I think will turn this more into a running game, so that might mitigate the damage for them a little bit.
Thank you so much, Eric, for all of your thoughtful questions. Corey wants to know one last time, is Lazard for sure out? Yes, no, wide receiver Allen Lazard, he is inactive today. However, the Packers are seeing the return of a few different players, including running back Tyler Ervin and safety Darnell Savage Jr. Both of them are back in today's lineup. So is defensive lineman Tyler Lancaster. So a few healthy players, a few not healthy players, including left tackle David Bakhtiari. He is inactive in today's game. So a mixed bag for the Packers against the Minnesota Vikings. That is going to do it for us today, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I will be live after the game with Packers News reporter Ryan Wood. So make sure you come back afterwards with all of your questions. We will try to answer them all and wrap up the game again for the Packers against the Vikings. For Pete Dougherty, I'm Olivia Reiner. We'll see you next time.